Thank you, Raisa, Elder Briskupe, and Dr. Brian Rowe. Your words and opening remarks have highlighted the many threads of past work as well as ancient wisdoms that are coming together and interacting as we gather here for this important summit, reflecting on the profoundly important connections between environments, health, and well-being, not only for us as people, for all our relations, but also for our work, especially those that are in the room today. And reflecting on these confluence and connections is also really relevant to this introduction that I now make to Senator Margo Greenwood. It's my great honour to meet up with and introduce Senator Greenwood here in Ottawa, having been very fortunate to have met and worked with Professor Greenwood in her various roles at the university, based from the University of Northern British Columbia over the last decade or so, and time spent on Lheidli territory. Now, Senator Greenwood is an internationally recognised and highly respected Indigenous scholar of Cree ancestry. Importantly, she is a mother, a grandmother, a researcher, an author, and a friend and inspiration to many. In her new role as an independent senator in British Columbia, she promotes and ensures the continued well-being of all children and families in Canada. Until her appointment to the Senate, as has already been mentioned, Dr. Greenwood served as academic leader of the National Collaborating Centre for Indigenous Health, and many of you will know her in this role, which was an inspiration, and as interim scientific director of the CIHR's Institute for Indigenous Peoples' Health, alongside her professorship, which she retains at the University of Northern British Columbia's education program. Dr. Greenwood has worked with UNICEF, the United Nations, the Canadian Reference Group to the WHO Commission on Social Determinants of Health. She has served on the Assembly of First Nations Public Health Expert Advisory Committee, the Indigenous Health Advisory Committee to the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, and the Public Health Network of Canada. The work that I first heard about with Dr. Greenwood was in the development of early childhood programs, particularly federally funded programs, the First Nations Inuit Childcare Initiative, the Aboriginal Head Start Urban and Northern Health Northern Program, and the First Nations Head Start on Reserve Program. She's recently co-authored the Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Framework, and Dr. Greenwood was a founding member of the BC Aboriginal Care Society and now serves on the board of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC and as a council member of the BC Patient Safety and Quality Control. That commitment to children and our next generation is part of what we will learn about today in the framing remarks, and a sense of an intergenerational orientation that's so important to our work. In recognition of this transformational leadership and contributions to society, especially in Indigenous health and early childhood, Dr. Greenwood has received numerous awards and recognitions and was most recently appointed to the Order of Canada as an officer. As well as my deep respect for Senator Greenwood's impressive background, and as an Indigenous scholar, leader, and now senator, I'm also especially glad to have come to know our shared love of walking by rivers, which we were chatting about just now with Elder Briskupe. I'm especially appreciative of the many conversations walking at the confluence of the Fraser and the Nechako rivers on the unceded territory of the Lheidli. And this is particularly relevant given that the name Lheidli means the people of the confluence of two rivers. And so with that sense of confluence and a reminder of the preciousness of all that each of you are bringing together to the proceedings today, and the importance of coming together as a whole to talk about these topics, I offer my sincere thanks and good fortune to have Senator Greenwood to offer framing remarks for this Environment and Health Summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Margo, for those really generous opening introduction. Tansei, and good morning. I want to begin by acknowledging the ancestors and traditional unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin peoples, and thank them for allowing me to be here with you on these lands to engage in your discussions. Thank you, Elder Braskupe Simon, for opening our day in a good way. Margo Greenwood Netsigetsunam Nihio from Treaty 6 territory in what is now known as Central Alberta. I am of the Peesu clan. I am a Thunderbird of that clan. I speak this morning from that place and as an academic from the University of Northern British Columbia, not necessarily as the senator. Thank you to Margo Parks and the organizing team for inviting me to share some ideas with you this morning that I think are interesting and ones that give me hope. Thank you, Brian, for the EHSI overview. Before I start formally into this talk, I want to talk to you about the photo that you see here in front of you. This is the wishing tree. I grew up beside where my ancestors walked alongside the river's edge. This tree is right by the river and was in my backyard almost. This is where I learned to dream. I would lay on my back and look up through the gnarled old branches to the sky and think of all the things that could be. Dreaming gave me hope. I suspect we all have our own way of dreaming and ways of acting on these imaginings to create change. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today amongst colleagues and friends who are like-minded in their commitment to the environment and to our health. I was particularly happy to see my NCC leads and their teams with them, my CIHR colleagues and friends that I have done research with and participated with you over the many years. I also want to acknowledge the work of the recipients of CIHR's Environments and Health Signature Initiative, and thank you for all the work you do on behalf of all Canadians. These projects that you engage in address current realities while setting the stage for future opportunities. At no time in our planet's history are these actions of greater importance. We have only to look at the focus of the federal government's 2023 budget on building Canada's clean economy to see this significance. Right, I gotta stay on top of this. As I thought about this gathering, I was reminded of a time I shared with Mary, a Sewepma elder and one of my teachers. It was a time of feeling totally connected to the land, as if you were a part of it, like a tree rooted in place. As I felt the ground at my feet and the energy that flowed from it, there was a sense of peace, and I belonged. And in that moment, I felt the tears run down my cheeks, and a small hand touched my arm as I heard the words, "When you cry, you are closer to the Creator." I also felt the responsibility of being in that relationship. When we speak of the environment and the land, these are the first thoughts that come to my mind. This relationship of connection and belonging is a critical part of my health and well-being. And I believe this to be true for many other Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples around the world. Many Indigenous philosophies of being are anchored in understandings and connections to the land, where all things are in relationship. All things animate and inanimate have spirit and are therefore alive. The waters, the rocks, the sky, and all its beings are part of our being in the world. Our stories, our protocols teach us how to be in relationship with one another and all things on this fragile planet we all call home. The Sioux people have a story of how food was given. It tells how each animal laid down its life so that the people to come would have food and clothing and lodging. The bear led, offering his life, followed by spring salmon, Saskatoon berry, and bitterroot. Even today, hunters, fishermen, gatherers offer prayers, thanking the animals and plants for giving their lives to nourish ours. There is no greater gift than this. This relational way of being, taught through stories and lived experiences, was intended to preserve and ensure life for generations to come. In his 1854 speech to government officials, Chief Seattle said, "Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect, all are holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are part of the earth, and it is part of us. The perfumed flowers are our sisters. The bear, the deer, the great eagle, these are our brothers. The rocky crests, the juices in the meadow, and the body heat of the pony and man all belong to the same family. Will you teach your children what we have taught our children, that the earth is our mother? What befalls the earth befalls all the sons of the earth. This we know. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected, like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of a life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. There's much work to be done and an urgency to do it. We cannot turn back the clock of time, but we can share respect for the land and for each other across generations around the world in order to protect the global ecosystem we all share. Indigenous philosophies can inform contemporary adaptations and interventions, not just for Indigenous people, but for all peoples. And I'm reminded of a saying when I work in early childhood is, we don't throw out the baby with the bath. We need all ways of thinking, all processes, all strategies to bear on this challenge we face. We know that First Nations and Inuit and Métis peoples when compared with other Canadians, continue to experience inequities across all sectors, particularly and with significant consequence across the health sector. We also know that these inequities are associated with a colonial legacy of historic, economic, sociocultural, and environmental disparities that continues to impact our children, our families, and communities even to this day. Many of these inequities result in diminished quality of life, resulting in poverty, crowded substandard housing conditions, overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in the correctional system, and children in the child welfare system, family violence, lack of accessible educational opportunities and health services, food insecurity and lack of potable water, all of which have a detrimental impact on children, families, communities, and our nation as a whole. An example of this reality of inequities is made clear through the COVID experience. COVID is often referred to as the Great Revealer. This lived reality exposed injustices that underlie people's vulnerabilities and access to services. For example, to address these individual and population-based inequities, we need diverse approaches that are anchored in justice and take into account diverse knowledge systems. We need research that reaches across distinct environments, sectors, and disciplines. We have geographic, cultural, and local differences that need to be considered. We need platforms to communicate and share our ideas and actions. The recent announcement of the Declaration on Planetary Health by the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada offers us one example of acknowledging and addressing the environment and health. This declaration focuses on environmental, social, and structural determinants of health using community-based approaches. It calls for collective actions to address planetary health education, research, and the transition to climate resilience and low-carbon health systems. This declaration, in my opinion, underscores the work that you have been doing with CIHR for the past 5 years, and for some of you, a whole lot longer. The declaration is also indicative of more and more groups and individuals prioritizing the intersection of the environment and health. The very definition of planetary health speaks to the inextricable link between human health and the health of our planet, while considering the impact of human disruptions on the Earth's natural environment. Our being depends on human health, flourishing natural systems, and wise stewardship of the land. I wonder if Chief Seattle knew that he was talking about planetary health or complex, multifaceted ecosystems as we understand them today. I actually believe he mourned a way of life, a way of thinking, and a way of being in the world that was changing before his eyes. Maybe we are coming to understand what Chief Seattle always knew. Oh, I missed that one. There he is. I'm going to go to here. Climate change is a global disruption to the human and natural life as we know it. I have focused on this given the urgency surrounding it, but also recognize that there is more to environment and health than climate change. lots more. Climate change impacts us in multiple ways, and here's a few examples. I'm showing you this image because some of what I'm going to talk about is taken out of this report as well as other references. The examples include the disproportionate effect of climate change on northern communities. The permafrost that underlies almost half of Canada is particularly vulnerable to climate change. Transportation systems that support the movement of goods to the north and creation of economic opportunities are threatened by soil instability. The disruption to Indigenous ways of life. Climate change impedes activities such as hunting, fishing, and gathering, which compromises access to traditional foods and has exacerbated the growing crisis of food insecurity among Indigenous peoples. The unpredictability of the environment impacts traditional Indigenous knowledges that are anchored in those relationships with the land, the waters, the animals, the plants, and natural resources. It is this physical and spiritual connection with the land that impacts Indigenous peoples as individuals and collectives, particularly around mental and spiritual wellness. I worked in northern BC during a time of many forest fires. It was devastating to go to that land to see how it had changed, how the impact of that could change the stories. But I like to think about it as it creates new stories. And I think we have that opportunity. Water quality and sanitation are equally significantly impacted by climate change, and with many Indigenous peoples continuing to not have access to safe and clean drinking water, we will only continue to compound this generational crisis. Knowing these impacts and understanding their complexities informs our research, development of adaptation initiatives, policy development, resource allocation, and structural change. There's much work to be done to create the kinds of interventions necessary to address the impacts of climate change. Those of you, all of you in this room, are already thinking about these complexities and developing interventions and processes that can inform the necessary policy and system change. We need more knowledge through research to address and inform the work. We know there are challenges. Some of these are specific and obvious. Others are much more anchored, for example, in Indigenous health research more generally. A couple of those challenges that I think are important to all of us is a long history of unethical research practices that have contributed to a misappropriation and abuse of Indigenous knowledges, and of course, the mistrust of the research process itself. Also deeply significant, and all of you will be able to resonate with this, a lack of disaggregated and longitudinal data, particularly for specific populations, and I speak of First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and many, many others. We need that. We need that kind of work, and we need that kind of information. There's also a need to consider some of the gaps that we see, and a few of those I offer as examples. We need to consider the diversity of populations and their geographic locales. The far north, the provincial north, urban and rural. That is a huge question on many, many people's minds, is the urban settings and the rural settings. I come from Prince George, as Margo was saying in the introduction. I have a special place in my heart for the provincial north. So I certainly think about that in any of these new initiatives, and of course, urban and rural. The intersection of climate change and gender, for example, particularly the experiences of gender diverse people, children and youth, is another really significant consideration. And I think going even beyond that is to considering all of the isms, if you will, in what it is that we plan to do. We need to be thinking, and we need to hold up that kind of diversity. The holistic and long-term impacts of climate change. Do we know that? Have we started those? Do we have the benchmarks? Have we started that work? I think that will be really important in years to come. Resilience and protective factors focused on climate change. What makes that community resilient? What makes those people? What protects them? In the Indigenous world, we often get that question around the resiliency of Indigenous people. So I think about that now, the resiliency of the land. And what is our role in protecting that resiliency? I think these are important questions. Determinants of adaptive capacity, including access to financial resources. Do you have the resources to do the work that you need to do? The role of government in policies and programs in supporting that work is critical. And I think we always have to ask ourselves the effectiveness of adaptation initiatives, asking ourselves, how effective are the adaptations we are implementing, or how effective is my work? I think we can do that all the time. We don't need to I don't have to wait for a formal evaluation of my program. I need to ask myself, am I doing what I said I would do? And I think we can ask ourselves that every day. I'm going to close now with some thoughts that I hope will underscore your ideas and your work and support the continuation of your efforts. Research anchored in social justice and inclusivity that upholds the richness of diversity offers us opportunities for innovation and creativity needed to address the challenges we face in the relationships between the environment and health. This is not a time for business as usual, but rather a time for change. We must convene across disciplines and sectors, creating a platform for multiple players, individuals, organizations, and governments who can see themselves as valued contributors to the common good of all. Social and environmental determinants of health approaches offer a way to examine the complexity of people's health that crosses sectors and disciplines while addressing them at individual, system, and structural levels. One might ask oneself, how do I contribute to this work? What is my sphere of influence? How do I participate? If I'm a policymaker, what is my role? What should I be doing? What do we need to do together as a collective? Where do we come together to do this good work? We are all part of this system and a much larger global one. We cannot deny the impacts of climate change. The United Nations states that climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are at a defining moment. It is not just for us gathered here today that we address climate change. but for future generations. That is for our children, our grandchildren, and those yet to be born. So we ask ourselves, what do we need to do to save and prevent? I close now by going back to where I began. My Moshem, my grandfather, taught me that we must look to the past to know where we are going in the future. Learning from the past and having the courage to create change is indeed a gift. I suspect all of you have that gift, or you would not be in this room today. The significance of the environment and health work you do cannot be underestimated, nor can it stop. We need, all of us need the work that you do. We need everyone contributing to making the world a better place for all. I thank you for listening to me, and I wish you very productive discussions in the remainder of your meeting. Hi.